Welcome to everybody. We have got a full house. We've got a very, very busy auditorium with us here today at the university. Not quite sure where the university is located because I'm not sure if we're in the Orange Free State or Free State as they call it now, or whether we're sitting in the United Kingdom or somewhere in between. I'm Sharon Constanson. I'm chairman of the South African Chamber of Commerce, and I welcome all of you here with us today, and particularly our eminent profs from the University of the Free State. It's a wonderful occasion we've got, and the interest in the global citizenship being spearheaded out of South Africa is incredibly vibrant, and we're seeing a lot of interest in our topic. Professor Francis Petersen, Rector and Vice Chancellor of the University of the Free State of South Africa, invites us to rethink our relationship with the world in a series of courageous conversations on the theme, the global citizen. So we have a four-part series that we are covering over the next couple of months, and this is our second in the series. Prof. Petersen argues that COVID-19 has been a powerful disruptor. It has given us a stark reminder of the need to rethink our identity, of where we belong, our normative view of citizenship, and if we want to secure long-term survival of our civilization and the environments which support it. Powerful voices from public life, intellectuals, public interest, and business leaders, academics, naturalists, religious leaders, astrophysicists, economists, ecologists, and others will be invited to share and debate their views over the period of time we'll be covering in this series. So I formally welcome all of you to the United Kingdom, to our event here at the South African Chamber of Commerce in the UK, and into our courageous conversations. Eminent South African business leaders and University of the Free State Chancellor, Prof. Bonang Mohale, clearly a very heavy draw card based on the number of people joining us here today, will join Professor Petersen to unwrap the role of universities can play in creating a global citizen mindset to affect material change and in constantly evolving and turbulent international world. How do universities produce research and graduate alumni who can go out into the world and to drive and reflect the bedrock value of global citizenship, namely that of mutual respect for others and for all creatures and our environment that sustains us all? A university education can be a very powerful way to push the reset button on the baggage of upbringing and our histories, personal, cultural, national, racial. Whatever shape our world is, universities can promote informed self-reflection, curiosity, and tolerance as a driving force of how we can shape our realities, understand our prejudices, promote tolerance, and animate life in a better world. Professor Petersen and Professor Mohale will reflect on how universities can accelerate and respond with greater agility to this challenge. So at this point, I would like to initially introduce Professor Francis Petersen, who was our guest on our first event, where we unpacked a number of issues around the concept of the global citizen. Professor Francis Petersen, can I ask you please to give us just a short introduction, and I'm giving you the honor of introducing the Chancellor of your university.
Thank you very much, Sharon, and it's fantastic to be here this afternoon. So I'm Francis Petersen, as Sharon has indicated. I'm the Rector and Vice Chancellor of the University of the Free State. And in our first session, we talked about global citizen, and we talk about how would I define a global citizen. And we also talk a little bit about if we have a collective of global citizens in a corporate environment or in an organization, we use the term corporate citizen during our conversation at our last meeting. But from my perspective, I'm actually quite delighted to have also in conversation with me this afternoon Professor Bonang Mohale. A lot of you probably would know Bonang more from the industry perspective and his track record of a trailblazer in the industry environment. But I should also say that he is also the Chancellor of the University of the Free State. And Sharon, the University of the Free State is in the Free State Province in South Africa, and I'm delighted to have Bonang with us this afternoon and in a conversation. Welcome again through you, Sharon. Welcome, Bonang.
Welcome, Professor Bonang Mohale. It's an absolute pleasure as the chairman of the chamber to welcome you to our audience, and to those who will be listening to the recording that will be following. We will have many, many recipients to that, as we always do. I look forward to hearing your conversation and posing a few questions to you later.
Thank you very much, Sharon, and to Professor Petersen. So I'll take my cues from him, and up front, I must confess that the most difficult questions, I will send them over to Sharon for sure.
A little cheeky, Prof. I think I might bat them back. I'll go and find a cricket bat in the meantime. I look forward to your conversation.
All right. So, Sharon, in our colleagues that's attending this conversation, in our last conversation, we talked about the global citizen, and I define the global citizen as an individual that really are aware and understands the challenges of the world, and have also sets of values, individual values. But when those set of individual values are orchestrated or put together in an organization that become collective values and shared values, to what extent do you then exhibit the key things that the world out there would need? And we also talked about what is the world that a global citizen would be engaging with. And I refer to aspects such as a fair world, a world that is socially just, a world that is safe, stable, a world that is prosperous, and a world that is caring. And all of that is culminated in a way where I believe global citizens should be striving towards. Now, very importantly, in that context of a global citizen, it is to what extent does the university provide the platform to be able to equip our graduates that leave the university to be able to operate in that global world. And I also indicated that the leaders of tomorrow, the leaders in society, the leaders in business, are at the moment on our university campuses, whether at the University of the Free State, other campuses in South Africa, on the continent, or in the globe. So it's very, very important to understand the platform in which those conversations happen, and in which those attributes are imparted or parted to our graduates. So that was really the conversation. And then a final comment that I actually make is that besides the attributes that our graduates need to have to operate as global citizens, it's also important to understand that there's a relationship between the human being and the planet and the natural world. And what is that relationship, and how do our students effectively and our graduates understand that there is also a critical role to play? And then finally, I refer to the whole issue of technology. And COVID-19 have indeed accelerated the way in which technology is utilized, is being uptaken by either business or processes or organizations. And to what extent have that reshaped our understanding of the environment in which a global citizen should be operating? And I was referring to the way in which collaboration and co-creation happens, the fact that we could engage with our peers and counterparts in other parts of the globe much more easily, where the whole issue of internationalization primarily has been based on mobility in the past, probably pre-COVID-19. Post or in COVID-19, we understand that the virtual platforms, the fact that business models in organizations have changed to such an extent that you might find organizations or employees that are based in South Africa but could work for organizations in other part of the globe. So that was really for me the essence of what I brought across in my conversation with Sharon at our last meeting. And I think the important question that one need to ask is that in a university environment, if you produce these graduates, that's going to work in the global world, work in multinational companies. Bonang, you have got a lot of experience in working for and also in fact leading some of the organizations that are multinational of nature. From your perspective, what would you say are the key areas and the key attributes that global citizens or corporate citizens that work in that environment needs to have? And I do want to ask a second question on that, and that is, are our universities preparing our students to be able to do exactly that, to be able to respond to those needs of multinationals?
Professor Petersen, thank you very much for, I think, laying that groundwork. I'll very quickly go to some one or two practical examples. But in answering your question directly, I think if the pandemic has done anything, is to expose that all of us have now become global citizens, whether we like it or not. Because in the olden days, we used to define strategy as simply how to compete. This is a militaristic term. And you compete at a country, at a business, and at an individual level. So if anything, this pandemic has demonstrated beyond any shadow of doubt that all of us are now totally available, totally mobile, but also totally insecure. So I save 2 hours a day, every day, of my 8 hours, 1 hour traveling to the office, 1 hour traveling back. That's 2 hours. Now I don't have to. And what has happened to that 2 hours? I did not invest it in myself or in my children. I've simply given it back to the employer. I work harder. I work all the time. I'm available. And because of that, I don't even know how to switch off, which brings other issues of our well-being and mental health. And I'll come back to that during questions and answers. So in an academic institution type of environment, what type of leaders do you want to describe, define, and shape? So, I think leaders, not managers. People that must lead, not just manage. That must not pioneer, but disrupt. Because leadership is about being genuinely obsessed with the development of others, whilst management, it's about getting things done through other people. So in that environment, number one, I think we need to bring to light this notion of an inclusive academic excellence. Number two, we want to bring in a social justice approach to our universities, because the biggest injustice throughout the world, particularly in South Africa, has been exclusion. Thirdly, it's about this notion of academic freedom, that I don't have to like what you are saying. In fact, I don't even have to agree with you, but by God, I'll defend your right to say it. The last one is, how then do we bring about this notion of public ownership of universities at a time when most people, when they get into the graduation hall, it is their very first. Number two, it looks very foreign. The pictures, the murals, the art, the symbolism, the things that are done in there are outrightly hostile. To our parents, they could be Mars for all we care. How then do we rapidly evolve to giving this community, this society, the power, the wherewithal to believe that the 26 public universities in South Africa belong to them as much as it did to HF Vervoed. I'm hoping that in laying that foundation, Prof, it is broad enough to allow us to have quite some critical, crucial, but nonetheless courageous conversations.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Bonang. And I think I totally agree with you. One of the, in fact, currently in the UK, in fact, is done by the British Council over the last 2 or 3 days. There's a conference happening, Going Global 2021, under the auspices of the British Council. And there's a lot of engagement between academics, but also other stakeholders of universities across the globe in this conference to say, how should universities actually respond post a COVID-19, post the COVID-19 pandemic? And I think to understand that really, we probably need to understand what the role of the universities are in relation to equipping society and the graduates. Now, on the one hand, we've got the curriculum. So what needs to be in the curriculum? And there's a need now and a drive from students to say that I would like to determine when I want to be taught, and also what size bit of size of your content need to be taught. So we use a term in academia called micro-credentials, where we shorten those. But that's the type of questions that the student of actually now and tomorrow is trying to ask. The second part the university does is research and development. Now, again, the fact that COVID-19 have realized or provided to us the ability to engage virtually, in fact, with any country in the world and with any researcher in the world, does that add value to the questions that industry, private sector, commerce, government, or communities would ask that need to be researched on? So that's the second part that I think universities does. And then the third part is that you're referring to leaders earlier, but our role as universities is also to provide how society should look like, how the society of tomorrow should look like, and not only saying that universities represent the cosmos of society, but that transformative intervention is crucial to be able to determine that. Now, if those are the 3 areas, Bonang, I would like to just get your views in how do we actually make sure that the universities in contributing to the global citizen brings in to the universities the voices, the experience, the opinions from those very sectors that our global citizens will have to engage with. Now, and that's often the challenge that universities sit is that, we talk about issues like collaboration and co-creation, but how does it actually come to fore? Are there any thoughts perhaps from your side in your, when you have been on the, I want to use between inverted commas, on the other side of the university boundary, interfacing with the corporate environment, what sort of suggestions would you make to be able to strengthen that input far better than what it is at the moment?
So first of all, I think a realization that the people who do go to universities are a small part of any population in any country. Before the 27th of April 1994, when we ushered in our democracy, only 7% of the population could afford to go to university. We thought we're doing well. We have now increased it to 11%, which means the other 89% have absolutely no chance. But in South Africa, it has a particular significance because through education is the only way in which you can transcend social classes. But we also need to be asking to say, educate for what? because not all of us can be obsessed with academia. Germany has demonstrated beyond any shadow of doubt that they are Europe's biggest economy. In fact, the Marshall Plan found expression in Germany. And their model is very easy. They catch you at standard 8. They don't even have to wait until you get to standard 10. We call it grade 12 now. And they just make you a good corporate citizen. They teach you how to fix cars. And the proof is in the pudding. The best German marquees in the world are made, serviced, and maintained in Germany. Porsche, Mercedes-Benz, BMW, Audi, and the people's car, Volkswagen. So you are creating blue-collar workers that can buy houses in Don Park, where Chris Hani was assassinated. In Leondale, those are the people who afford houses. In fact, I now pay more for my plumber per hour than for my cardiothoracic surgeon, because that's how you build a successful economy. Lastly, Prof, I think we need to continue to be curious and ask ourselves, why is it that we have not yet decolonized our curriculum? Because my grandmother used to say, until and unless lions have their own storytellers, the story about hunting will always glorify the hunter. Put differently, history is always up to the temporary occupants of the corridors of power. The victors write the history. No wonder then that South Africa, that has brought civilization to the West, that has built the pyramids, brought mathematics, arts, and science to the world. Not only does it have its art lying in France and needs to be brought back to Tanzania in Sarah Batman's remains, but also in Patrice Lumumba's teeth that are still sitting in a country in Europe, and it still needs to be brought back. But most fundamentally, we still teach history at our institutions of higher learning that starts from 1652, as if the Black nation started existing then. What about the Khoisan who were here long before us? What about Ushaga, Mzilikazi, Mushweshwe, Ngungunyane, the heroes of the African struggle and leaders? I mean, how can God be so unkind as to put Black people in the southernmost part of the continent and leave them without any form of religion or guidance? Because today we are told everything that Black people do, it's backwards, it's archaic, it's heathen, and it's unchristian. That everything that is good must be white. And that's why we even pray and sing in our hymns that, dear Lord, make me white as a sheep's wool, as if it's not enough that the devil has already been painted black. Back to you, Prof.
Okay. So I just wanted to add on the whole issue of decolonization, but in the context of global citizenship. I referred to earlier about curricula and research, and I must say there's a particular drive in the area of collaboration, co-creation, where universities and other learning institutions in the North and in the West, and for that matter in the East as well, are starting to collaborating much more with the African continent, because there's a belief that it's important for us to also share the different perspectives, and this is how you actually start to globalize knowledge. And within South Africa, in fact, if you can probably take a lot of universities in the UK now, Oxford, Cambridge, and others, that that is partnering with institutions on the continent, particularly on the area of decolonization. So I thought I just wanted to say I think a lot of that has been happening, but we need more of that. And one of the things that I will come back a little bit later, but that one of the things that came out of this global going global 2021 was about the equity of contributions between the North and the South. But I would like to park that for the time being, because I want to move a little bit probably closer to the corporate environment, because ultimately the whole issue or one of the key drivers of university output are graduates, and they are graduates hopefully that will make a contribution to first of all the organization, the company where they work, but hopefully also with the in terms of the economy in the particular country, and then hopefully a contribution to the world. But I wanted to get your just your particular views in terms of when we and in my conversation with Sharon, I was simplistically describe an organization and corporate entity as three components or three actors or actresses that participate in that. The one is the shareholders that I believe owns the business, and they want to focus primarily, or not necessarily primarily, but they want to focus on the value creation per se. Then the second one is the stakeholders, and there are various stakeholders depending on which business sectors you operate. They, for me, are the partners in the business. And I often talk about that those partners should also be allowed to co-create in the business. And then the third one is the employees that are that are the business, in fact, because they drive specific values, they drive what the business is all about. And ultimately, it boils down to how can we do good while doing business? If I use that sort of tagline in a way. But as a global citizen, where you have got your own values, you've been hopefully exposed to critical inquiry. You've been exposed to talk about the issues of democracy. You understand and are sort of aware of what the world is about. To what extent do you, within a corporate environment, extract maximum value out of that global citizen that could give value to the shareholder, could give value to the employees itself, and also to a certain extent in a co-created way provide value back to the through the partnership? Is there something that you could say or could add to that, Bonang?
So, Professor Petersen, you have hit the nail on the head. This notion of co-creating and co-crafting presupposes some sort of equality. And you're absolutely correct that there are now many stakeholders in the business. The one that I want to emphasize on is also the society and the community in which you are located. So to add the fourth leg, as it were, because what keeps most boards awake at night in the 21st century, but also 27 years into democracy, is to ensure that corporate decision-making is consistent not only with the whims of the shareholders, but a much broader stakeholder community. Employees. Stakeholders are defined as anybody that is likely to have an impact on your business. The society and the community were located. Had the executives of Marikana driving through this informal settlement every morning and every afternoon felt personally affronted, and they took it upon themselves as global citizens should, they would have said, but these are my colleagues. Why is it that I can't leverage the force, the impetus, the resources of the company to make sure that they also have a roof over their head, and indeed with bricks and mortar rather than corrugated iron? That's this notion of global citizenship. How you ensure that when creating jobs, you're not creating jobs in and of itself. You're actually creating the markets of the future, because there's a problem when your own employees can't afford your own goods and services. Therefore, we now see a migration from what we used to call integrated reporting, the 3 Ps of the planet, of the people and profits in that order, towards more ESG as an acronym for the environment, society, and governance. On our way towards 2030, when we are hoping to be meeting the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So the companies are asking themselves now, how can we ensure that we are sustainable in the short term in order to build long-term resilience? Because the resilience, especially in Africa, surely must be much more than the food, water, energy nexus, even though energy is the 4th means of production. Lastly, Prof, it's what you touched on, to say, as a company, can we continue to do well as business by doing good? The founder of one of the top 5 pharmaceutical companies in the world, William E. Merck, in the States is called MSD. Outside of the States, it's called just Merck. And they've got a presence in 222 countries and locations. They've got a vision statement, mission statement. But they also have the founding statements of the founder. And it simply says, for me, it encapsulates this global citizenship by a company. It simply says, we try and remember that medicines is for the people and not for the money. The more we have remembered that, the more money we have made. Put differently, my grandmother used to say, isn't it amazing that those people who wake up every morning chasing money hardly ever have any, but those that follow their passion make money until it comes out of their ears. So I think the type of individuals we want to produce from our universities are those with discernment, who know not only the difference between income and cash, but also the difference between rich, which is having money, and wealthy, which is having time. Back to you, Prof.
All right. So, Bonang, I want to pursue that a little bit further, because I'm also looking at the Q&As that come through, which indicate that there might, when graduate leaves the universities, there might be a field that they, to a certain extent, are inhibited through their exposure at the university, in the university environment, to be able to completely flourish in a global environment. I want to potentially hear from you that if you produce the global citizen that we all are now know, what are the attributes that graduate or citizens should have, and they enter a corporate environment, how would they go about, and what sort of advice would you give to a global citizen operating in a company in driving issues related to climate change, biodiversity, energy efficiency, or if you talk about the energy transition? How would they go about to hear that those to ensure that their voices also becomes heard in a corporate environment, understanding they come through from a platform where they have been equipped to potentially do that?
So let me start with the word that you used, exposure. You can't miss that which you don't know. So imagine for a moment, you have architecture students, and on their first year of study, you say to them, please draw me a simple house that has a balcony. 90% of the population of South Africa does not live in houses with a balcony. It's 4-roomed houses. From Orlando East to Langanyanga, Guguletu, Mondlo, and Nkandla in the dusty hills of KwaZulu-Natal. Therefore, they might be unable to draw a balcony. Does it make them stupid students? No. You can't draw something that you haven't really visualized. And that has been the problem with our education all along, that a majority of our people are not exposed. Hence, the biggest injustice being exclusion. But you see, when we say, what then can we do? This is where also South Africa has an advantage. Because today the world talks about transformation, not just reformation. And the Americans talk about diversity and inclusion. And let me submit, Prof, that if you can manage in South Africa, you can manage anywhere else in the world. Here's one thing amongst many that South Africa can contribute to the world agenda to ensure that we move forward in space. Because most countries are centuries-old democracies. South Africa is a teenager. But in the 350 years of colonialism, 98 years of separate development, 48 years of apartheid, the one thing that we did well on the 27th of April, 1994, is that we didn't have time to change only the politics and then wait another 100 years, and then change the economics and wait another 100 years, and then change society. From the 28th of February, when we came back, and on the 10th of May, when we inaugurated our first democratically elected President Rolihlahla Nelson Mandela, we changed everything. We changed politics. Because here was a prisoner, a convict for that matter, who became the most famous president in the world, and indeed the one that gave us reconciliation. We also changed the economy because we wanted to make sure that this economy in terms of ownership is broadly reflective of the demographics. When we say today we are the most unequal society in the world, in fact, what we are talking about is only income inequality, not wealth inequality. When you add asset inequality, you'll see that the majority of South Africans, who are 90% of the population, own less than 1% of the wealth. And they are squashed into 13% of the land. And yet we know that there is no possession like land. But you see, we are also changing society. We used to have immorality acts. All you had to do was to look at a white woman in a particular way as a black man, and you went to jail. The laws went into our bedrooms and determined who we could fall in love with. Not only Group Areas Act as to where we can live. Not the fact that as a black person, it doesn't matter even if you are a billionaire, you could not own a production facility and therefore a factory anywhere else except in the former homeland areas. Therefore, that's why I'm saying, for this notion of diversity and inclusion, we live it every day in South Africa. In fact, any manager, not even a leader, that has survived in South Africa can run the whole of North America in terms of diversity and inclusion. Lastly, Prof, for me, diversity is being invited to the party. Inclusion is being asked to dance. Belonging is bringing and playing your own music. Back to you, Professor.
Okay, that's very nicely put, Bonang. This sort of metaphor, and I want to also, picking up of some of the questions here, want to make the statement that I also made earlier with Sharon in our earlier conversation around the impact of COVID-19 on our global society, where on the one hand we have seen protectionism, we have seen nationalism, and I think it was a response to the potential vulnerability of each country globally to go and say, well, let us first look after ourselves. But then on the other hand, you also had the issue of solidarity, because the fragility of humankind has been challenged, and therefore people know and people have argued that if you can't deal with this collectively, due to the interconnectedness of the world, what's happening in the one country doesn't even matter where that country is going to have an impact on the other country. So those were the two areas that I tried to highlight that came out of COVID-19. But from your perspective, coming back to the values of global citizens in society, but also in a corporate environment, do you think that as organizations, as entities, as universities, we do enough to bring across that sort of values that I think organizations and the world are aspiring to? The value of honesty, the values of integrity. In the South African, but also in other parts of the world, people often talk about corruptions, and we have seen how corruption have been identified within the COVID-19 pandemic. But are universities, and are we imparting those effectively and efficiently enough to our global citizens that will have to operate in a world that I initially said should be a fair world, should be a socially just world? And if not, are there different ways to be able to ensure that we could do it much more effective?
Sure. Prof, again, you hit the nail on the head. I could not have put it better myself. You see, honesty, integrity, and respect are universal values. In Chinese, in Mandarin, in Arabic, and in Hebrew, in Sesotho and isiZulu. Prof, this is where COVID-19 has demonstrated that, of course, you need herd immunity in your society, you need herd immunity in your country, but the world needs herd immunity because it has become small. So the US can't brag and say, we have inoculated all our people, therefore we can open our economy, because tomorrow somebody from Ethiopia will come and reinfect the whole of the US. This thing, we are told, started in Wuhan, either in the food market or in a lab. Something went wrong. It was publicized in December of 2019. By the 10th of March, 27,000 kilometers away in KwaZulu-Natal, we were gifted with our index patient. So for me, all of these issues that you raise are encapsulated in the fifth state of the nation by our own president, and it could have been any president in the world. It could have been Joe Biden. It could have been Mahaful in Tanzania, in the four foremost overriding priorities. Number one, he said, all of us, and this is true for the rest of the world, we must defeat the coronavirus pandemic. Number two, we must accelerate our economic recovery. Number three, we must implement economic reforms to create sustainable jobs and drive inclusive growth. Lastly, we must fight corruption and strengthen the state. So if I bring it back to business, we need to be clear as the world on what are those four things that we compete on. What are the six, as you said, where we both cooperate and collaborate on? Because competition in the 21st century is no longer between and amongst products and services, but is going to be in value chains, and what type of value chains are able to deliver from China to the 300 million citizens of the US of A and the 60 million of South Africa, who always come last. So the president set us a herd immunity of 67%, that's 40 million South Africans, which means we ought to have been inoculating at the rate of 100,000 per day, every day. Had we done that, it would have taken us 400 days or 13.3 months at the cost of 20 billion, depending on the type, single or double dose, on the cargo insurance, on the foreign exchange at that time, on whether it is actually manufactured locally or is indeed imported. So we had agitated and orchestrated that we only finish in 2021 towards the middle. Only 16.4% of South Africans belong to medical aids. To these medical schemes, collectively, they have a maximum liability of 7 billion, which means to them it's really only 2% of their premiums. So where are we now? Globally, we are talking about 177 million total cases, 3.83 million deaths. In South Africa, we're talking about maybe 1.8 million total cases, slightly more than 58,000 deaths. South Africa has only inoculated 1.2% of its population. We are just reaching 1.2 million. And that was our target only for frontline workers at the end of March. Phase 2, we had not even completed phase 1. There are now 11 countries and growing every day that have inoculated 100% of their population. Even if we compare ourselves with African countries, 29 African countries are ahead of us, only 26 are behind us. Lastly, to show the global nature of COVID-19, 22 countries have opened their economies to vaccinated travelers. Back to you, Prof.
Okay. That's very, 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 very helpful in terms of your response. Bonang, there are a couple of questions that I will get to, but before I get to one or two of those that we could that I would like you to respond, the whole issue of global might always been seen by graduates and sometimes also by academics in universities that is out there. You know, and I think before COVID-19, mobility was key, and that's often linked with internationalization. But global is also, yeah, it is close to us. It is the environment, our everyday living is also part of global. And we had earlier the discussion about decolonization and how we could start to co-create things. In relation to Africa, because South Africa, we often always have to remind ourselves that we're part of the African continent. With the beginning of the earlier this year, the African Trade Agreement that came into play the 1st of January. And there was one statistic that I can recall, I might quote it now incorrectly, but the trade between Africa and the rest of the world probably equates to close to about $600 billion per annum. Only 12% of that is internal trade on the continent, and hopefully with the African Trade Agreement, that will become much more higher. Is there something that because part of the trade and part of that engagement is in fact to increase collaboration and to increase interaction? And a second statistic, because that now start to link to the question that one of our attendees have asked, is that Africa has got the highest entrepreneurship rate in the globe at the moment. Now, the question is really around entrepreneurship, and to what extent are universities providing enough catalysts, or isn't enough catalyst to grow entrepreneurship, so that it can be utilized to be able to engage and develop collaborations not only on the continent but also in other parts of the globe. So the question is really about the entrepreneurship part, and in the South African context, you know, where our unemployment rate is at the moment. I just wanted to hear your thoughts, because we talk about attributes that are important for a global citizen, and maybe entrepreneurial skills, innovative thought, creativity is going to be a key part of that. And I would like to hear your thoughts on that, Bonang.
So, Prof, you are absolutely correct. We have the highest entrepreneurship rate in the world, and we have the highest failure rate of entrepreneurs in the world. And we take the longest to create entrepreneurs in Africa and in South Africa. It might take you 2 years, a minimum of 350,000 South Africa just to start the business. Singapore, 2 hours. The other last piece of statistic is that when we compare ourselves with the BRICS counterparts, because we decided to be part of that economic bloc, more than 50% of new jobs created are created by small and medium enterprises. In South Africa, that is less than 15%. So here's a huge opportunity that if we were to focus on it, we can unleash not only South Africa, but the African economy. Why does it matter? You see, America can afford to be arrogant because they've got 300 million population. It's a good market. South Africa, 60. But when you look at the continent of Africa, all of a sudden it becomes interesting. It's 1.3 billion people, same as India. But in India, it's one government, one political party, one legal system. In Africa, we're talking about 55 countries that speak 3,000 languages with multiple jurisdictions. Of course, it's part of our colonial legacy. They sat in a room and say, this is how we're going to carve up Africa. But at least the numbers become interesting. And it has a continental GDP of 3.4 trillion US dollars, formally, as measured by the World Economic Forum. Informally, you could double that. In fact, there is no reason why Africa is a poor continent, because everything that the world needs in mineral resources is found in the continent of Africa in abundance, either as number one or number two. Therefore, we are poor by choice and poor as a result of our legacy. But the greatest forex earner in any country is tourism. None of the African countries come up in the top 10. In fact, South Africa, 2019 attracted 10.2 million tourists. 2020, during the pandemic, that came down to 2.8 million. Now compare that with the most visited country in the world, which is France. 89.4 million people. Spain, 83 million people. US of A, almost 80 million people. China, 63 million people. Italy, 62 million people. Turkey, 46 million people. So you can see that we're not even scratching the surface. Tourism in South Africa could be doubled that. In fact, this is the only country in the world where you can say to Ms. Tourist or Mr. Tourist, everything that you need, we have in abundance. This is truly God's own country. Blue skies, African sunshine. The biggest waterfall in the world called Musiwa Tunya, and some colonialist names it after his queen, calls it Victoria Falls. Bigger than the Niagara Falls. At its widest, 1.6 kilometers wide, plunges at 105 meters to the bottom at a rate of 585,000 cubic meters, enough to generate hydroelectric power for the 1.3 billion people and export the rest to Europe. The sun here shines 340 days of the year, and yet the World Authority on on solar energy is Germany, that has no more than 90 days of sunshine. So I think we need to produce the type of students that realize the wealth, the gift that is in and amongst them, and use it to improve the quality of lives of the majority of their own people and start believing in themselves, to genuinely be in the presence of dignified greatness from the black pool of excellence.
Yeah. Bonang, I'm going to go to our last question before I'm going to hand over back to Sharon. And it's probably going to be a difficult question. And you did say that if it's too difficult, you will pass it on to Sharon. So you can still do that as well. But it's really about, and one of the comments made from our attendees has been saying breaking down borders. Now, I presume that it's not only physical borders. We need to transcend borders. We need to transcend culture. That's part of the whole global citizen concept. But it's in our early discussion, we did talk about that ecosystem of engagement, the interfaces between private sector, industry, commerce, universities, government, and communities, so that we can start to co-create, start to bring some of those thoughts in. So we did talk about that. That's important for global citizen, for global citizenship. But I want to raise it up to a more political level, and global geopolitics. We just recently had the G7 summit, and there are lots of people that are talking about whether the G7 is still necessary, because when it was formed in the 70s, it probably contributed a large percentage to the world economy, but that's now been overtaken. So shouldn't we just look at the G20? But the underlying question is really, there are a lot of global institutions that need reform. Even about the World Health Organization, do we need reform in that entity as well? Now, as a global citizen, it is those geopolitics becomes quite important, not only in our thinking, but in terms of how it actually impacts the way global citizens engage and interact with one another. If you have to give some advice to us at universities in relation to the global politics, how that steer the global citizen agenda, what would that be? We only got about 3 or 4 minutes left. 3 minutes left. So Bonang, if you could just give me that advice in the remainder of the time before I hand it over to Sharon.
Just some sound bites then, Prof, in the interest of time. Of course, the World Bank, the IMF, the World Health Organization needs to be reformed, again, to be more inclusive. The G7 used to run the world. The G20, including the Business 20, I went to Tokyo in Japan to prepare for the G20, which was in Osaka with the sitting president. But also the United Nations Security Council. Because remember, these people are appointed, It's not a democratic process. So what advice would I give? I think, let me start with South Africa and say, what drives the share price? It's rumor and speculation. Therefore, in South Africa, to address the lowest levels of confidence, of trust and hope, we must take the top state capture miscreants to jail. Of course, we must secure vaccines. We must implement the socio-economic reforms. We must reduce government debt. We must fix our more than 740 state-owned entities and state-owned companies. We must increase our spend on infrastructure on the productive side of the economy, not on the consumption and auction of the spectrum. At this rate, we've been talking for 10 years about digital migration, 5G. There's a loss of faith. We still haven't. Botswana, Lesotho, Namibia, and Swaziland were on 5G before us. Lastly, I think we need to redefine the role of business. It can't be shareholder maximization. It has to be, in a pandemic, if you can survive, you're already profitable. Bring about this notion of shared value. Number 3, do no harm. 4, make the world a better place. Number 5, ensure that you take education seriously, because we haven't so much as we borrowed this world from our forebears as we borrowed it from our children. Education matters because when one steadily bends the midnight oil, one gains access to the domain of knowledge and wisdom, the world of meaning, the world that cannot be conquered without a persistent crusade. The people that are educated are not easily fooled by corrupt politicians. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you very much, Bonang. And I think it's such a befitting closure in terms of this conversation. The advice that you are providing, also advice to business and to the corporate environment, but very importantly for our graduates, our global citizens that's going to hopefully populate these businesses in South Africa, on the continent, and globally. and I'm really proud to have you as our Chancellor. But thank you very much for this wonderful conversation, Professor Bonang Mohale. And at this note, Sharon, I'm going to give back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, both profs. This has been a very interesting conversation. I was just trying to sum up where you have gone in this conversation. You've gone global. You've covered everything from our personal values right the way through to business values, political values, and the integrating of our educated students into the global world, the value of education. And what I found very interesting was the opportunities that Africa is offering that South Africa can grab. The entrepreneurial opportunities, the dealing with the corruption, the green agenda that South Africa has a very important role to play if it's given if it takes the opportunity that it should be doing. What did come out very clearly, Prof. Bonang Mohale, was in your storytelling, which is such a lovely African trait, and the pictures that you drew for us. But also what you showed was the can-do mentality of a South African nation. And we are not scared to fail. We at least have the decision to be creative, to be entrepreneurial, to try, to make a difference. And it's lovely to see that energy that you give. And I have got so many questions, but I have no time left. So I'm going to, at this point, pull this to a close. We have got lots of questions which are being captured. We will share those and pass those on to the two profs. If there's some feedback in our thank you email, we will do that. But as we all know, the value of education is important. But to me, what's more important than education is our own personal values, because those are what is going to make the global citizen that we need to be individually to make the real sustainable difference to the future of the world. I'd like to thank both of you, and Prof, the man who's sitting in business and in academia, and Prof Francis, who is in an academic environment and shared all your wisdom with us. To all of our audience and to those who are going to be with the recording, thank you very, very much for a very quality hour that we have spent together. Thanks very much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.